The desert was not a place, it was a sentence. In the 1880s, the high plains of New Mexico were serving a hard term, and Clara McKee served it with them. The land was cracked open, a parched mouth begging a sky that gave only white glare. The sun did not rise, it ignited, climbing the empty blue to hang high and bright as an accusation. Clara felt it as a physical weight. The heat pressed on her shoulders when she stepped from the cabin. A flat, dry, baking force that stole the moisture from her breath before she could exhale it. Dust was the real currency here. It coated every surface. A fine, pale powder that rose in clouds from her footfalls and painted the horizon a hazy, hopeless gray. Water was her second religion. Her first had burned away with her husband. Jed. Water, however, demanded a daily, practical faith. She measured her life in the trips to the well. The creak of the pulley was her morning hymn. The splash of the bucket hitting the dark. Distant surface her only answer. The bucket was old, wooden and heavy. She hauled it hand over hand, her palms calloused, her arms wiry with strength she had never asked for. This was grace earned through labor, and she hoarded it like a miser. A cup for the chickens, a trough for the mule, a ladle for herself, a splash for the withered herbs by the door. The rest went into the barrel, lidded, sacred. Her ranch was a small, stubborn mark against the immensity. A one-room cabin, a lean-to for the mule, a sagging chicken coop, and a patch of ground fenced with hope that had long since turned to brittle sticks. The cabin itself was built of sod and rough timber, hunkered low as if trying to hide from the wind. It was a place of survival, not comfort. But the house had a secret, a heart that beat cool and dark beneath the baked floorboards. The cellar. Jed had dug it, a deep, square hole lined with stone, meant for storing potatoes and apples through the winter. Now, it was Clara's anchor. She kept the trapdoor covered with a bearskin rug, the entrance hidden not from thieves, but from the sun. Down there, the air was still and blessedly cold, smelling of damp earth, cured meat and shadows. Jars of beans and dried corn lined the shelves. Slabs of bacon hung from hooks, and in the deepest, darkest corner, her emergency barrels of water sat like sleeping gods. The cellar was her fortress. It was where she kept the things that mattered, the food that kept her body alive, and the box that held the few things left of the woman she used to be. A ribbon, a tintype of a stern-looking family she no longer knew. A single letter, folded until the creases were white. She was a widow. That was her definition in the town of Redemption, 10 miles east. Jedediah McKee had been dead for 2 years, killed in what the town called a misunderstanding. Clara called it a Tuesday. It had been a blur of dust, shouting, and a poorly aimed shot from a man too drunk to hold his liquor, let alone his rifle. The clash had been vague, pointless, and final. It had left Clara with a shotgun, a deed to 30 acres of dust, and a profound understanding of solitude. She had learned to use the shotgun. It leaned by the door, always loaded. Her hands, once soft, knew the familiar weight of the stock and the smooth, cold curve of the twin triggers. She was a fair shot. She had to be. She practiced on tin cans, the sharp crack of the gun a punctuation mark in the vast, silent landscape. She practiced not to hunt, but to warn. The town of Redemption was a collection of plank buildings huddled together for comfort. It had a saloon, a general store, and a blacksmith. It also had a sheriff, a man named Fates, whose badge was thin and whose spine was thinner. The law in these parts was a suggestion, a dusty signpost pointing toward a civilization that had not yet arrived. The real power in Redemption, and in the sprawling, lawless territory around it, was a man named Tucker. He was a rancher with 1,000 head of cattle and a deep-seated conviction that his way was the only way. He had gathered a group of volunteers, a posse of men who rode with him, enforced his rules, and drank his whiskey. They were not lawmen. They were a weather system. They moved with the force of a prairie fire, and no one, least of all Sheriff Fates, was inclined to stand in their path. Tucker represented a hard, simple certainty in a place that offered none. Lately, the talk in town, the whispers Clara overheard when she went for salt and flour, was of the Comanche. There had been skirmishes to the south, rumors of raids, of stock gone missing. No one ever asked why. No one ever wondered about the treaties broken, the land stolen, the buffalo gone. They only needed a focus for their fear, an excuse for the anger that the drought and the dust had bred into their bones. The Comanche were a convenient vessel for it all. The mood in redemption was turning brittle. It was the feeling before a lightning strike, the air tight and charged. The sentiment was simple: whoever is not with us is against us. There was no room for shades of gray in a land bleached white by the sun. You were with Tucker in the town, or you were nothing. You were, perhaps, a target. Clara existed in the space between. She was not with them. She was apart. Her small ranch, her isolation, her refusal to break or bend to the town's unspoken rules, made her an object of suspicion. A woman alone was an affront to their order. A woman who kept to herself, who did not seek their protection or their gossip, was a puzzle they could not solve. They watched her. When she rode in, her mule laden with the few things she needed, the conversations in front of the general store would quiet. Men would nod, their eyes hard and assessing. The women would pull their shawls tighter, as if her solitude were a contagion. She felt their judgment like the sun. Another accusation. She ignored it, her face set, her eyes focused on the task at hand. Salt, flour, kerosene. She paid her coin, loaded her mule, and rode out. The 10 miles back to her ranch, a decompression, a shedding of their world. She preferred the silence. In the silence, she could hear the world as it was, the skitter of a lizard on the hot rock, the high, lonely cry of a hawk circling on the thermals, the slow, rhythmic creak of the empty windmill. These were honest sounds. They demanded nothing from her but attention. She was drawing water, the late afternoon sun finally beginning to dip, painting the sky in bruised colors of purple and orange. The air was cooling, the relief so sudden it was almost painful. She set the heavy bucket on the porch, the wood dark with spilled drops. She would use this to wash. A quick, frugal scrub before the night chill set in. She stood for a moment, wiping her hands on her apron, her gaze sweeping the horizon. It was habit, a checking of the perimeter. The land was empty, as it always was. Just the vast, rolling expanse of scrub and rock, stretching to an endless edge. Then she heard it. Not the hawk, not the lizard. Her father's voice. A memory so sharp it was like a fresh cut. He had been a hard man, a man of the borderlands, and he had taught her things she had not known she was learning. She looked at the empty expanse, the place where the sky met the earth, and the old words came back to her, clear as the coming night. "You see one of them alone," he used to say, his voice rough as gravel. "You be careful, girl. A man down, alone in the open. He is not a man. He is bait. The rest are always near." Clara shivered, though the air was still warm. She picked up her shotgun, checked the load, and placed it back by the door. She looked east, where the town of Redemption lay, and then south, toward the lands the Comanche called their own. The silence of the desert suddenly felt different. It was no longer empty. It was waiting. The memory of her father's voice hung in the air just as the first real chill of evening began to settle. Clara pulled her thin shawl tighter, her gaze still fixed on the southern horizon. The warning about bait, about the danger of a lone man, echoed within her. It was a rule of this land, a piece of hard-won wisdom. She was about to turn, to go inside and bar the door, when a flicker of movement caught her eye. It was not on the horizon. It was much closer, down by the dry creek bed, a shallow scar in the earth that marked the edge of her property. Something was wrong. It was not the movement of a coyote or a jackrabbit. It was dark, a shape that did not belong, slumped against the pale rock of the arroyo wall. Her heart kicked once, hard, against her ribs. Her father's words again, "The rest are always near." She stood frozen on her porch for a full minute, her knuckles white on the railing. The shotgun was inside, leaning by the door. 10 feet away, it felt like a mile. The shape in the creek bed did not move again. Curiosity was a luxury. Caution was survival. Clara lived by caution, but there was another, older instinct inside her, something deeper than Jed's death and her father's cynicism. It was the simple, animal recognition of suffering. She moved, not toward the house, but toward the cellar trap door. She lifted it, slipped down the ladder, and emerged a moment later with her second-best bucket, the one with a slight leak, and a tin ladle. She also grabbed a strip of clean cloth she used for cheese. Then, and only then, she went inside, picked up the shotgun, and broke it open. She checked the shells, snapped it shut, and stepped off the porch. She did not walk directly toward the arroyo. She moved in a wide, careful half-circle, keeping the high ground, her eyes scanning every rock, every clump of mesquite. The desert was silent. No dust plumes, no glint of metal, nothing. The hawk was gone, and the only sound was the crunch of her own boots on the gravel. She reached the lip of the creek bed and looked down. He was Comanche. There was no mistaking the long braids, the set of his features, the buckskin leggings now dark and stiff with blood. He was young, maybe 25, maybe less. His chest was bare, beaded with sweat and dust, rising and falling in shallow, painful rasps. His eyes were closed, his face a mask of gray exhaustion. A black shaft was buried deep in the muscle of his right thigh. An arrow. The feathered end was snapped off, but the ugly, dark wood remained, protruding at a sickening angle. A pool of dark blood had gathered on the stones beneath him. He was dying. Not of the wound, Clara guessed, but of the thirst and the heat that had come after. He had bled, and then he had baked. Her father's voice was a cold whisper in her ear. Bait. She raised the shotgun, the heavy barrels resting in the crook of her arm, the muzzles pointed at the sky, but ready. She waited. She watched the ridges around her, the silent, empty places that could hold a dozen men. Nothing. The sun was a sliver of fire on the horizon. The light was failing. The man on the ground moaned, a sound so quiet it was barely more than a breath. His lips were cracked, black, and swollen. Clara felt a war inside her. The first voice was her father's, the voice of survival, telling her to turn, to walk away, to bar the door and let the desert claim its own. It was not her fight. It was not her problem. A lone Comanche was a threat, a harbinger of more. The second voice was Jed's, faint and full of a naive goodness that had gotten him killed. You do right by people. Clara, it matters. The third voice was her own, and it was the most tired of all. It was not about morality or survival. It was about the crushing, relentless emptiness of her life. She was tired of the dust, tired of the fear, tired of the silence. This man, dying at the edge of her land, was the first human thing she had confronted in months that was not a suspicious shopkeeper or a leering member of Tucker's posse. He was just a man, and he was dying. She slid down the loose gravel of the arroyo bank, the shotgun held ready in one hand. She stopped 10 feet from him. His eyes remained closed. He had not sensed her, or perhaps he had, and simply did not have the strength to care. "Can you hear me?" she said, her voice rusty. There was no response, only that shallow, hitching breath. She stepped closer. She could smell him now, the copper of blood, the salt of sweat, the dust of the trail. He was strong. She could see that, even in this state. His shoulders were broad, his arms corded with muscle. He was a fighter, But he had lost. She set the bucket down, the sound of the metal scraping on stone loud in the twilight. His eyes snapped open. They were not dull. They were black, sharp, and full-edged with a defiant fire that startled her. He saw her. He saw the shotgun. His hand, the one not resting on the rocks, moved weakly toward the knife sheathed at his belt. He was all but dead, and still he was ready to fight. Clara stopped, holding her ground. "I am not here to hurt you," she said slowly. He said nothing. His eyes locked on hers, bright with fever and hate. "You need water." She dipped the ladle into the bucket. The sound of the water, cool and splashing, was obscene in the dry air. The man's gaze flickered to the ladle. His throat worked, a painful, dry swallow. Here it was. The moment, the choice. Her father's warning was screaming at her now. "Do not engage. Do not get involved." Clara looked at the water in the ladle. It was her own, earned by her own labor. To give it away was to give away a piece of her own survival. She looked at his cracked lips. She stepped forward, holding the ladle out. His eyes narrowed. He was suspicious. He thought it was poison. He thought it was a trick. "Water," she said again, her voice softer. "Just water." She crouched, keeping her distance but holding the ladle within his reach. She laid the shotgun on the gravel beside her, her hand inches from the trigger. It was a gesture of truce, but a well-guarded one. He watched her for a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a pained grunt, he pushed himself up slightly on one elbow. The movement sent a fresh wave of pain through him, but his eyes never left hers. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out. His hand was shaking, not just from weakness, but from pride. He would not be helped. He took the ladle from her. His fingers, hot and dry, brushed hers for a second. It was like a spark. He did not drink, not yet. He held the ladle under his nose, sniffing the water, his gaze still fixed on her. He was checking for whiskey, for poison, for anything but what it was. Finally, he seemed satisfied. He tipped the ladle to his lips, his head falling back, his eyes closing in a brief, profound moment of relief. He drank it all, the water spilling down his chin, making clean tracks in the dust and grime on his skin. He held the empty ladle out to her. His breathing was worse, the small effort having cost him. Clara dipped it in the bucket again and gave it to him. He drank a second, and then a third. After the third, he let the ladle fall from his fingers and sank back against the rock, his eyes closing. The fire was gone, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. He had accepted the gift. The bargain, whatever it was struck. Clara stood up. She picked up her shotgun. What now? She could not leave him. The coyotes would be here by midnight. She could not. The sound came from the ridge, the thunder of hooves, at least half a dozen horses, moving fast. The man's eyes flew open, the fire instantly back. But this time it was not hate. It was alarm. He tried to push himself up, his hand fumbling for his knife, his gaze sweeping the ridgeline. He knew. Clara grabbed the bucket. "Be quiet," she hissed. She scrambled up the bank of the arroyo just as the riders crested the ridge, silhouetted against the last bloody light of the sunset. It was Tucker. He sat his big roan stallion like a king, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low. 5 other men fanned out behind him, their rifles already drawn from their scabbards. They saw her immediately. "Well, well," Tucker's voice boomed across the cooling air, a thick, hearty sound that always set Clara's teeth on edge. "Mrs. McKee, out for an evening stroll. Are we—" He urged his horse forward, the other men following, their horses kicking up rocks and dust as they descended toward her. Clara stood her ground, her shotgun held low, but not hidden. "This is my land, Tucker, you know that." "I surely do," he said, pulling his horse to a halt 10 yards from her. He was a big man, his face flushed with whiskey and authority. He looked past her, down into the arroyo. His eyes, small and hard, narrowed. "And what have you got down there? Looks like you found yourself a little pet." Two of his men dismounted, rifles in hand, and moved toward the creek bed. "Stay off my property," Clara said, her voice cold and even. She raised the shotgun, not pointing it at him, but holding it across her chest. A warning. Tucker laughed. "Your property. This is just dust, woman, and you are harboring a killer on it." "He is a dying man." Clara said, "He is hurt." "He is hurt because he was killin'." One of the dismounted men yelled from the creek bed. He had found the man. "It is him. Tucker, it is the one from the Johnson place. We have been tracking him for 2 days." The other man raised his rifle, pointing it down at the man in the arroyo. "He is still breathing. Want me to finish it?" "No!" Clara shouted, her voice sharp. The sudden authority in her own tone surprised her. Tucker looked at her, his smile fading. "No, that is a Comanche. Mrs. McKee, a buck. He and his friends burned the Johnson homestead, killed Jedediah's brother, and ran off with 2 horses. And you are saying, no." "I am saying you will not kill a man on my land." Clara said. The words felt strange, heavy in her mouth. But they were true. This was her line. This patch of dust, this dry creek, this was hers. And the one rule she had was that she decided what happened on it. "He is a murderer." Tucker spat, his hand moving to the revolver holstered on his hip. "And you are in the way. Step aside." "I will not." The silence was absolute. The horses stamped, their bridles jingling. The 2 men in the arroyo looked up, waiting. The man in the creek bed, Koa, was hidden from her view, but she knew he was listening, watching, his hand on his knife. "Clara," Tucker said, his voice dropping to a low, reasonable tone that was more threatening than his shout. "You are a widow, a woman alone. You do not understand the rules out here. You give that man comfort. You are no better than he is. You are a traitor to your own. Now, for the last time, step aside and let my men finish their business." "My husband is dead," Clara said, her voice shaking just slightly, but she held it steady. "But I am not, and this is not your business. This is my property, and the law says you cannot come onto my land and execute a man without a trial." Tucker threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Law! The law, I am the law out here. Girl Sheriff Fates is sitting in the saloon right now, and he will sign any paper I put in front of him. This is justice, prairie justice." "Then it is murder," Clara said, "and I will not have it." She leveled the shotgun, not at Tucker, but at the man in the creek bed who still had his rifle pointed at the wounded man. "You!" Clara called, her voice ringing with a strength she did not know she possessed. "Get out of the arroyo, both of you!" The man looked at Tucker, uncertain. "Clara, put the gun down," Tucker warned, his hand now gripping his revolver. "If he shoots," Clara said, her eyes locked on Tucker. "I shoot, and I'm a good shot. I will not kill him, but he will not walk right for a year, and you know it." It was a bluff, a terrible, hollow bluff. She was a fair shot at tin cans. A moving man, in the dark, was another thing entirely. But her hand was steady. Her voice was pure ice. Tucker stared at her. He saw the set of her jaw. He saw the double barrels of the shotgun, black and final in the gloom. He saw a woman who had, in the space of a minute, crossed a line. She was no longer just the lonely, pitiable widow. She was something else, something dangerous. He measured the cost, a dead woman, a fight with a crazy widow. For what, a half-dead Indian who would be gone by morning anyway? It was not worth the trouble. Not yet. He let out a long, slow breath, his hand falling away from his gun. "You are making a mistake, Clara, a terrible mistake. You are choosing him, over us, over your own kind." "I am choosing my land," Clara said, "Now get off it." Tucker's face was a mask of cold fury. He turned his horse, the animal dancing nervously. "You heard her, boys. Let's go. The woman wants to keep her pet. Let's see how long it stays loyal." The two men scrambled out of the arroyo, giving her wide, nervous looks. They mounted their horses. "When he cuts your throat in the night," Tucker said, his voice low, "do not come crying to me, and do not come into town for supplies. You are not welcome. You have made your choice." He dug his heels into the roan, and the posse thundered up the ridge and disappeared into the night. Clara stood, the shotgun heavy in her arms, her entire body shaking so hard she thought her teeth would rattle out of her head. She listened until the sound of the hooves was completely gone, swallowed by the vast, indifferent silence. She was alone, truly alone, now. She slid back down into the arroyo. The man was watching her, his black eyes unreadable in the dark. He had heard everything. She put the shotgun down and picked up the leaky bucket. "Can you walk?" she asked. He did not answer. He just looked at her. "I cannot carry you," she said, her voice rough with exhaustion. "And I cannot leave you here. They will be back, or the coyotes will. You have to move." She offered him her hand. He stared at it. "I saved your life," she said. "I think. Now you have to trust me. Can you stand?" He pushed her hand away, with a deep, shuddering groan that was half pain and half pure will. He grabbed the rock beside him and began to drag himself up. He used his good leg, his arms straining, his face contorted. He got to his knees, his breath tearing through his chest. Clara watched him, her heart pounding. He made it to 1 foot. He wavered, leaning heavily on the rock wall. The arrow in his thigh scraped against the stone, and a fresh, dark stain appeared on his leggings. He hissed, a sound like a snake, but he did not cry out. He stood, swaying, a tall, proud, and broken man. "My house," Clara said, pointing. "It is not far." He looked at her. He looked at the house. He looked at the ridge where Tucker had disappeared. Then he took one agonizing, lurching step. It took them almost an hour to cross the 30 yards to the cabin. He leaned on her, his arm, hot as a furnace, draped over her shoulders. She took most of his weight, her own legs trembling. He did not speak. He barely breathed, focusing every ounce of his energy on the next step. She got him inside, the smell of his blood and sweat filling her small, clean home. He collapsed onto the floor by the cold hearth, his good leg folding under him. Clara barred the door. She lit the lantern, the yellow light flooding the room, revealing the pale, grim set of his features, the grime, the blood. He was looking at her. "Why?" he whispered, the single word a rough rasp. "I do not know," Clara answered honestly. She crossed the room and pulled back the bearskin rug, revealing the trap door. She lifted it. The cool, damp air of the cellar rose up to meet them. "They will come back," she said, looking at the door. "Tucker is not a man who forgets. He will come back at first light, and he will not ask questions next time." The man, Koa, watched her, his eyes following her every move. "Down there," she said, pointing to the black square of the cellar. "It is the only place. It is dark, but it is safe, and it is cool." She offered her hand again. This time, he took it. She helped him to the edge of the opening, his body rigid with pain. He looked down into the darkness, then back at her. It was a hole in the ground, a trap, a grave. "I gave you water," Clara said, her voice low. "I stood against Tucker for you. I will not bury you, but you must hide." He held her gaze for a long, searing moment. Then he nodded, a single, sharp dip of his chin. She helped him onto the ladder. He went down, step by agonizing step, his breath hissing through his teeth. When he reached the bottom, he looked up at her, a shadow in the darkness. Clara hesitated. She was about to close the door, to plunge him into total blackness, to put a lid on the decision she had made. She was betting her life, her future, her place in the world, on a wounded enemy. She reached for the lantern. "You will need light," she said. She took one last look at the barred door, at the shotgun leaning against the wall, and then she picked up her skirt and descended into the dark, pulling the heavy door closed above her head. The lock clicked into place from the inside, a sound like a final judgment. The darkness in the cellar was thick, smelling of cool earth and cured pork. The lantern Clara held cast huge, dancing shadows that made the small space feel like a cavern. Koa lay on a pile of old canvas sacks, his breathing a low, ragged sound in the sudden silence. The trapdoor was closed, the heavy bar slotted into place above them. They were sealed in. He watched her, his black eyes, bright with fever, never left her face as she set the lantern on an upturned barrel. The light illuminated the horrific wound in his thigh. The arrow shaft was snapped, but the dark, fletchless wood was buried deep in the muscle. The buckskin around it was black and stiff. Clara set her jaw. The confrontation with Tucker had been loud and fast, a thing of pure, hot anger. This was different. This was quiet and slow, and it was waiting. "I have to take that out," she said, her voice flat. "It will poison you if I do not." Koa said nothing. He simply watched her, his hand resting near the hilt of his knife, which he had not let go of, even in his weakness. "It will hurt," she said. It was a stupid thing to say. Of course it would hurt. She turned from him and went to her shelves. She was not a nurse. She was not a doctor. Jed had been shot, but it had been clean, through the chest, and he had been dead before she even reached him. She had no experience with this, only a hard, practical sense of what must be done. She found what she was looking for, Jed's last bottle of whiskey, nearly full, a small, sharp skinning knife, a needle and a spool of thick thread. She went to her water barrel, the one she kept for emergencies, and poured a precious quart into a clean bowl. She ripped a long strip from an old cotton sheet. When she turned back, he had pushed himself up on one elbow. His face was pale beneath the grime and sweat, a mask of tightly controlled pain. "What is your name?" she asked, kneeling beside him, but not too close. He was silent. "My name is Clara." He just stared at the knife in her hand. "This is for cleaning," she said, holding up the whiskey. "And this," she held up the knife, "is to cut it out. I do not have a saw for the arrowhead." She had seen them. Nasty, barbed things designed to tear, not just pierce. She uncorked the whiskey and poured a generous splash onto a rag. "This will burn." She reached for his leg. He flinched, a violent, sudden movement, and his hand tightened on his knife. "I will not hurt you," she said, her voice low and firm, the same one she used on a spooked mule. "Not more than I have to. You can try to take it out yourself, or you can let me, but it has to come out." He looked at her, at the knife, at the whiskey. He was trapped. Tracks _0002_PPE'd in her cellar, trapped in his own body. He let out a long, slow breath and laid his head back on the sacks. He did not close his eyes. He laid his knife on his chest, but he did not put it away. It was a concession, not a surrender. Clara took it as permission. She took the rag and began to clean the area, wiping away the caked blood and dust. The whiskey hit the raw flesh, and his entire body went rigid. A low hiss escaped his teeth, but he made no other sound. He did not move. He just endured. She saw the wound clearly now. The arrow had gone deep, but it seemed to have missed the bone. She could not see the head. "I have to see the other side," she said. "Roll, just a little." She helped him, her hands on his shoulder and hip, her face averted from the sheer, animal intimacy of it. He grunted, his muscles clenching, but he moved. The back of his thigh was a mess of swollen, bruised flesh. There was no exit wound. The head was still in there. It did not go through, she whispered, more to herself. This was worse. She would have to pull it back. The barbs would tear him apart. No, he rasped, his first word since the arroyo. His voice was a dry crackle. No, what? She said, pausing. He pointed at the knife. Cut! He motioned to his own leg, tracing a line. She understood. He wanted her to cut him open, to follow the shaft down and remove the head. She felt sickness rise in her throat. I cannot, she said. I am not a doctor. I will kill you. He shook his head, a slight, impatient movement. He grabbed her wrist. His hand was burning hot, but his grip was iron. He looked her right in the eyes, and she saw a terrifying, cold intelligence. He was not just a wounded animal. He was a warrior. He knew. Pia, he said, the word sharp. I do not understand. He said it again. Pia, and then, with great effort, Mother, no, cut. Clara stared. He was trying to tell her. What? That his mother would not cut, that she should not. His meaning was lost in the fever and the language. He let go of her wrist and made a different motion. He pointed at the snapped-off shaft of the arrow. Then he made a pushing motion. Push! She looked. The shaft was buried, but there was a hard lump under the skin on the back of his thigh. It had almost gone through. Almost. You want me to push it? She asked, her blood running cold. Through? He nodded. Just once. His eyes closed for a second in a wave of pain or acceptance. This was a new kind of hell. She took the skinning knife. Hold still, she said, her own voice shaking. She steadied her hand. She put the point of the blade against the lump on the back of his leg, took a deep breath, and made a small, quick, vertical cut. His body arched off the canvas. A silent scream, but he did not cry out. Blood welled, dark in the lantern light. She dropped the knife and scrambled back to the entrance wound. I am sorry, she whispered. Now, now. She put her palm on the broken shaft, and she pushed. It was like pushing against oak. His muscle was seized, locked against the intrusion. He gasped, a long, shuddering intake of air, and his hand locked onto his knife. You must relax, she pleaded. I cannot. You have to let it go. He shook his head, his teeth gritted. I will count, she said, desperate. 1, 2. On 3, she threw her weight into it. He roared. It was not a word. It was a sound from the center of the earth, a deep, guttural explosion of agony and rage. His hand flew from his knife, not at her, but to the canvas sacks, gripping them, tearing at them. The arrowhead, black and viciously barbed, burst through the cut she had made, slick with blood. Clara fell back, breathing as hard as he was. Her hands were covered in his blood. For a full minute, neither of them moved. The only sound was their ragged breathing, echoing in the small, stone space. It is done, she said, her voice a reedy whisper. He did not respond. He was shaking, a fine tremor running through his entire body. She thought he might have passed out, but when she leaned closer, his eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, tracking a spider on a beam. Now, she said, her voice stronger. I have to clean it. This part, he endured in silence. She poured whiskey straight through the wound, a front-to-back cleaning, as her father would have said. He did not flinch, he did not move. He had gone somewhere else, a place deep inside himself where the pain could not destroy him. Clara worked quickly then. She bandaged him with the clean strips of sheet, a thick, clumsy binding. But it was tight and it would hold. She gave him water, which he drank greedily. Then she covered him with an old horse blanket. She sat on the bottom rung of the ladder, the shotgun across her lap, and watched him. The night passed in a long, dark stretch of fever. He tossed, his legs moving, his hands gripping the blanket. He spoke, not in English, but in a low, rapid torrent of words that felt like stones rolling in a river. He was arguing with someone, or pleading. One word emerged from the fog, over and over. Pia. It was softer than before. Pia, Pia. It was a name, or a plea. It sounded like mother, or water, or home. It sounded, she thought, like a man who was lost. She felt a strange, unwelcome crack in her own armor. She knew that sound. It was the sound of ultimate loneliness, the sound she herself had made, silently, into her pillow for a month after Jed died. It was the sound of reaching for something that was gone. The fear of him, the Comanche warrior, began to recede. What was left was the fear of the man, Tucker, and a deeper, colder fear of what she had become. If she had left this man in the arroyo, if she had let Tucker's man put a bullet in his head, she would have saved herself a world of trouble. She would have been welcomed back into town. She would have been safe. And she would have been just like them. She would have been a person who could watch a man die and call it prairie justice. She looked at the sleeping man. His face, in the slackness of fever, had lost its hard edges. He was just a young man, caught in a war he probably did not start, but was now forced to finish. Just like her. She must have dozed, her head against the ladder, because she woke with a start. The lantern had burned low, the oil almost gone. The cellar was freezing. Koa was still, his breathing shallow but regular. The fever had broken. It was dawn. She could feel it, a change in the air, a sense of pressure. She had to know what was outside. She checked the man. He was asleep, truly asleep. She climbed the ladder, her legs stiff, her whole body aching. She quietly unbarred the trapdoor and lifted it an inch. Cold morning air hit her face. There was no sound, no shouting, no horses. She eased it open, climbed out, and closed it behind her. The cabin was gray and cold. She went to the window, her shotgun in hand, and peered through the grime. Her heart stopped. They were there, a dozen of them, maybe more. They were not charging. They were not yelling. They were just sitting on their ponies, in a wide, perfect, silent circle around her cabin, just beyond her sagging fence line. They were as still as the rocks, as if they had grown from the earth during the night. They held no rifles, at least none that she could see. They just sat, watching her house, a silent, patient siege. In the center of the line, directly opposite her front door, sat an older man. His hair was gray, his face a map of deep lines. He was not looking at the window, but at the front door, as if he knew she would have to come out. This was not a war party. This was something else. This was a jury. Clara knew she could not hide. Hiding was guilt. She had done nothing wrong. She did not know what she had done. She took a breath. She unbarred the front door. The creak of the hinges was shatteringly loud in the morning stillness. She stepped onto the porch. She did not raise her shotgun, but held it in the crook of her arm, the barrel pointed at the ground. The man in the center, the one she knew must be the leader, watched her. None of the warriors moved. There was no sound but the stomp of a restless horse and the high, thin cry of the hawk, returned for its morning hunt. Clara stood there for a long time. She would not be the first to speak. She would not be the first to move. This was her land. Finally, the leader raised a hand, palm out, a sign of peace. He nudged his horse forward, walking it slowly, until he stopped a good 20 yards from her porch. He was magnificent, in a terrible, stark way. He wore a simple buckskin shirt, and his gaze was heavy, not with malice, but with an unshakable authority. He looked at her, then at her small, smoking chimney. She had forgotten. She had a small fire in the stove, her morning habit, to make coffee. The thin wisp of smoke was a signal, a sign of life. "You have one of our young men," he said. His voice was deep, and his English was slow, but clear. It was a statement. "He was hurt," Clara said, her own voice tight. "He was dying. I gave him water." "He is Koa," the leader said, "a son of my brother. He does not belong to you." "He is a man," Clara said, finding her footing, the words coming sharp and clear. "I saved him as a man, not as one of yours, not as a prisoner. He was hurt, on my land. I did not take him. I helped him." The leader, Maka, considered this. He looked at her small, stubborn frame. He looked at the shotgun. He looked at the barred door. He understood part of the picture. Tucker's posse, the fight. "You saved him from the white men," he said. "I saved him from a man," Clara corrected. "One man, Tucker." "And now you save him from us." This was the test. Clara shook her head. "I am not saving him from anyone. He is in my house, in my cellar. He is hurt, but he is alive. When he is strong enough to walk, he can choose. He can go where he wants." Maka's eyes narrowed. This was not their way. And it was not the white way. It was something else. A third way that made no sense. "He is Comanche," Maka said, as if that explained everything. "And I am a widow," Clara shot back. "And this is my land, and I will not have blood spilled on it, not by Tucker, not by you." A murmur went through the line of warriors. They shifted, their hands moving to the knives at their belts. Maka raised his hand, and they were still. He looked at her for a long, hard minute. He was judging her. He was weighing her. Her house, her chimney smoke, her strange, impossible rules. He was trying to decide if she was a liar, a fool, or something else. "He wakes," Maka said finally. "He chooses." Clara let out a breath she did not know she was holding. "We will wait," Maka said. "He did not turn his horse. He did not leave. He simply backed his pony up, rejoining the line. The warriors, as one, dismounted. They did not unsaddle. They did not make fires. They simply stood by their horses, or sat on the ground, their faces turned toward her cabin, waiting." The court was in session. The judgment was delayed. Clara felt the trap snap shut. To the south, a jury of Comanche. To the east, a posse of angry settlers who now saw her as a traitor. She was caught between two worlds, a prisoner in her own home, her only ally a wounded enemy sleeping in her cellar. Mecca, from his place in the circle, watched the chimney smoke. It was a good, steady smoke, a sign of life, a sign of stubbornness. He gave a single, slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was not agreement. It was not approval. It was simply an acknowledgement of the fact. The waiting had begun. Clara turned, her shoulders stiff. She walked back into her cabin and barred the door. The weight of 20 pairs of eyes followed her until the latch clicked shut. Clara barred the door, the thick wood scraping into place. The sound was finite, a period on a sentence she had not meant to write. Outside, the silence of the Comanche was heavier than any shout. It was the silence of judgment, of patience, of a power that did not need to announce itself. It was the sound of her world shrinking to the size of one small cabin. She stood in the center of the room, her hands clenched, the chimney smoke, her one small betrayal. Her sign of life was still rising. She had to keep the fire going, or they would know something was wrong, that she was afraid. But it was more than that. The smoke was a signal to her, too. It was a sign that she was still there, still a home, not just a trap. She looked at the trap door. Below her, in the cool, earthy dark, was the man who was the cause of all this, the man who was now her only and most dangerous secret. She had to go back down. She lifted the door, the familiar creak loud in the tense quiet. Light from the single window sliced into the darkness as she descended the ladder. He was awake. The fever had broken, just as she'd thought. His eyes were open, and they were clear. The muddy, pained haze was gone. In its place was a sharp, assessing intelligence that was almost more frightening. He was lying on the canvas sacks, the horse blanket drawn up to his chest, but he was not relaxed. He was coiled, like a panther resting, every muscle ready. He watched her every move as she came down the ladder. "The fever is gone," she said. It was not a question. He said nothing. His gaze flickered from her face, to her hands, to the shotgun she had left leaning against a barrel. "They are outside," she said, finding her voice. "Your people, they are waiting for you." His expression did not change, but a new light entered his eyes. Not relief, not joy, just understanding. He had known they would come. She went to the water barrel, her back to him. It was a calculated risk. To show him she was not afraid, even though she was. She dipped the ladle, the sound of the water echoing. "You will be hungry. I will bring broth." She climbed the ladder, leaving the trap door open a few inches to let in some of the gray morning light. She left him in the near dark, with the knowledge of his rescue just outside, and the reality of his prison still around him. He was grateful. She could sense that, but he was also still a captive, and she was still his jailer. She moved with a deliberate, slow rhythm, stoking the fire, adding a little water to the pot, shaving off a few pieces of dried meat. Every action was expensive. The water from her barrel was low. The food was meant for her, to last until spring. The drought had made her garden a wasteland, and her stores were half of what they should have been. Every cup of water she gave him, every spoonful of broth, was a day of her own survival she was bargaining away. The high, thin air of the plains made every calorie precious, and she was giving them to a stranger, an enemy. Outside, the circle of warriors was like a living fence. She saw them from her small, dirty window. They had, as she'd seen, dismounted. They did not sit, they stood, or crouched, facing her cabin, patient, unmoving. They were a community, a solid, unbroken line of purpose. One man, on the far side, walked away from the circle, and another man stepped into his place. The exchange silent and fluid. They were a body, and they were all looking at her, the single, isolated cell. She ladled the thin, salty broth into a tin bowl. She took a piece of hardtack and a spoon, and went back to the cellar. He had not moved, but he had watched the square of light from the open door. He turned his head as she descended. She set the bowl down on the barrel next to him. "It is not much," she said. He looked at the bowl, then at her. He made no move to take it. "You have to eat, to get your strength back, so you can choose." He slowly, painfully, pushed himself up on his elbows. The blanket fell away, revealing the clumsy, thick bandage on his leg. It was clean. For now, he looked at the bowl, his pride warring with the animal need that was clear in his hollowed cheeks. Finally, he reached out, his hand steady, and took the spoon. He did not eat like a starving man. He ate slowly, deliberately, his movements economical. Each spoonful was a considered act. He finished the broth, his gaze on the bowl, and then he looked at the hardtack. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand, and then, with a strength that surprised her, snapped the hard biscuit in two. He held one half out to her. Clara stared. "What? No, that is for you." He did not move his hand, just kept it extended, the offering flat on his palm. It was not a request. It was a transaction, a sharing, a statement that he was not a beggar, not a pet. Slowly, she reached out and took the piece from him. She did not want it, but she understood. She sat on the bottom rung of the ladder and, forcing herself, bit into the dry, flavorless biscuit. They ate in silence, in the dim, earthy light, surrounded by the smell of damp stone and her stored food. When they were finished, he set the bowl down. Clara found herself speaking, the silence suddenly too heavy, too full of things unsaid. "They call him Tucker," she said, her voice quiet. as if she were talking to herself. "The man from last night, he runs everything, the town, the law, such as it is." Koa watched her, his face impassive, but his eyes were listening. "My husband, Jed," she continued, the words tasting like dust. "He was killed 2 years ago. The town called it a misunderstanding. That is what they said." She broke a piece of the hardtack in her hand, crushing it. "It was Tucker's men. They were drunk. They said Jed had—" "It does not matter what they said. He was dead. And after he was dead, everyone decided that it must have been his fault, that he must have done something wrong." She looked up, meeting Koa's gaze. "Out here," she said, her voice low and fierce. "Right and wrong, it is just a story they tell after the blood is dry. And the man with the most guns, he is the one who gets to tell it." Koa held her gaze. He did not nod. He did not offer sympathy. He simply received the information. He knew about Tucker. He knew about the men who tell stories. He lived in that same world, just on the other side of the firelight. She took the bowl. "I have to change the bandage." This was the next ritual. He did not flinch when she came near, but his entire body tensed as she unwrapped the cloth. The wound was red, swollen, but it was not poisoning. Her work, clumsy as it was, had been enough. She cleaned it again, this time with precious water, not whiskey. He endured it, his jaw tight, his breath hissing softly when she pulled the new bandage taut, her fingers, calloused and rough, brushed against the hot skin of his leg. It was a practical, sexless touch, but it was the most profound contact she had had with another human being in 2 years. It was the language of wounds, a conversation held in sinew and skin. She left him and went back up into the cabin. The tension was a living thing in the room, a string pulled so tight it was humming. She was a prisoner, held by both sides. She needed to do something. Not hide, not wait. She took her shotgun. She took 3 shells. She went out onto the porch. The circle of warriors watched her. Maka, still in his central position, did not move. Clara ignored them. She walked to her fence line, to the post where a chipped porcelain plate, her last good one, was nailed. It was her target. It was her defiance. She stood 20 yards from it. She raised the shotgun, the stock familiar and solid against her shoulder. She let out a long breath, her eye sighting down the barrel. The world narrowed to that one white, broken circle. She pulled the trigger. The blast was catastrophic, a thunderclap that shattered the morning silence. Echoing off the distant mesas, the plate exploded into white dust. The sound of the shot rolled across the prairie, a punctuation mark. She did not move. She broke the gun, ejected the spent shell, a wisp of blue smoke curling from the barrel, and loaded another. She fired again. The post itself splintered. She loaded the 3rd shell, fired. The top of the post vanished. 3 shots, 3 statements. She turned, the smell of gunpowder sharp in her nostrils, and walked back to her cabin. She did not look at Maka. She did not look at any of them. It was not a prayer for peace. It was a demonstration of skill. It was a warning that her kindness was not weakness. She would keep her own peace, and she would use her own tools to do it. She barred the door, her ears ringing, her heart hammering. She had drawn a new line. She was cleaning the shotgun, her hands steady, the smell of oil and solvent filling the small room. When she saw it, she was looking out the window, past the silent ring of warriors, to the far, far eastern horizon. It was nothing, a smudge, a tiny, almost invisible plume of dust, rising against the pale blue. It was not the wind. It was riders, many of them, too far to see, but she knew. Tucker. He was gathering his posse. He was coming back. The anger she had seen in his face last night was not the kind to be forgotten. He had been humiliated by a lone woman, and he would not let it stand. The string of tension, already taut, was pulled to a new, screaming pitch. She finished cleaning the gun, her movements precise. She was trapped. The Comanche to the south, Tucker to the east. She was on a small island, and the tide was coming in from both sides. That evening, she took the last of the water in her porch bucket down to the cellar. The sun was setting, and the light from the open trap door was a deep, bloody red. Koa was sitting up, his back against the stone wall, the blanket around his waist. He had been watching the square of light, listening to the world above. He had heard the 3 shots. He had seen her come down the ladder, her face pale but set. She offered him the cup of water. He looked at her, and his gaze was different. He had heard her story. He had heard her defiance, and she knew, with a sudden, cold certainty, that he had also seen, or sensed, the new threat from the east. He had lived his whole life reading the land, reading the silence. He knew what that distant dust meant. He took the cup. His fingers brushed hers, warm and dry. He did not drink. He just held the cup, looking at her as if for the first time. The man who had been a wounded animal, a delirious patient, a suspicious captive, was gone. In his place was the warrior, clear-eyed and assessing, his debt plain in his mind. He spoke. His voice was not the rasp of the night before. It was low, deep, and steady. The English was perfect, without the slightest trace of the guttural sounds she had expected. It was the English of a man who had listened more than he had spoken. "I owe you breath." Clara stood frozen on the ladder, the empty cup still held between them. He had acknowledged the debt, he had named it, and in doing so, he had changed everything. The words hung in the subterranean air, heavier and more final than the stone walls around them. "I owe you breath." Clara stood on the ladder, her hand still outstretched, the empty cup a void between them. He was not just thanking her. He was naming the bond. In his world, a debt like that was a tangible thing, a mark on the soul. In her world, it was a complication that could get them both killed. "You owe me nothing," she said, her voice too sharp. "You were hurt. I had water, that is all." Koa's eyes held hers, and she saw the lie in her own words reflected back. It was not all. It was never that simple. He did not argue, but he did not agree. He simply watched her as she took the cup from his unresisting hand and climbed out of the cellar, her mind racing. The sun had been up for 3 days. 3 days since she had faced Mackay. 3 days of the silent, watching circle of warriors. They were still there, a living wall of patience. They watched her feed the chickens. They watched her haul water from the well. They watched her, and they waited. On the morning of the 4th day, Clara knew she could not wait any longer. She scraped the last grains of salt from the bottom of the wooden box and stared at them. Without salt, the food was just fuel. Without salt, she could not cure the jackrabbit she had managed to snare. Without salt, in this heat, her body would fail. The town of Redemption was 10 miles away, 10 miles of dust, with Tucker at the end of it, and a ring of Comanche at the beginning. She went to the cellar. She had been bringing him up into the cabin during the heat of the day, when the sun baked the cellar and the main room was a few degrees cooler. He was off the floor now, sitting on Jed's old cot, his leg propped up. He was working, his hands busy, refletching the few arrows he had salvaged from his quiver, using sinew she had given him from her stores and feathers from her own chickens. He had a name. She knew. Maka had said it. Koa. But she had not used it. He was you, and he. To name him was to make him more real than she was ready for. "I have to go," she said, standing by the trapdoor. He did not look up from his work, his fingers moving with slow, pained precision. "The dust, to the east, it is still there." He had seen it, too, from the small window, the distant, lazy plume that meant Tucker was not gone, just gathering. "I know," she said, "but I am out of salt and needles. I will be back before sundown." Now he looked up. His eyes were sharp. "They will not let you pass." He meant his own people, the circle outside. "They will let me pass," she said, her jaw set. "They are not holding me. They are waiting for you." "They will not let you return," he corrected, his voice low. "You leave. You are free. You return. You are a part of this. With me." She had not thought of that. She had thought of Tucker. She had thought of the whispers. But Koa, he saw the world in harder lines. Leaving was a choice. Returning was a declaration. "I will be back before sundown," she said again, her voice final. She checked the shotgun, loaded both barrels, and put 2 extra shells in her apron pocket. She went to the cellar door. "Stay away from the window. Do not make a sound. If I am not back, the water barrels are full. The food will last a month." He met her gaze. "You will be back," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement. He knew her now. She left the cabin, the sun a hammer blow. She did not look at the ring of warriors. She went to the lean-to, saddled her mule, and tied her empty water skin to the side. She mounted, the shotgun heavy across her lap. She rode straight toward the line, straight toward Maka. The warriors tensed. A few of them stood, their hands moving to their waists. Maka did not move. He just watched her come, his face a mask of granite. Clara did not stop. She did not slow down. She rode as if the line of men was not there, her gaze fixed on the space between Maka and the man next to him. She was 10 yards away, 5. At the last possible second, Maka nudged his pony. The man next to him did the same. A gap opened, just wide enough for a mule and a rider. Clara rode through it. She did not look left. She did not look right. She felt the heat of their eyes on her back, a physical, burning pressure. She did not look back. She just rode east, toward town. Redemption was quiet when she arrived, the midday heat having driven everyone indoors. But the quiet was a lie. As her muled hooves clicked on the single dusty street, the town came alive. Curtains twitched. A face appeared in the window of the saloon, then vanished. The blacksmith, who had been shoeing a horse, suddenly found something fascinating to do in the back of his smithy. She was an outcast. Tucker's words had come true. She had made her choice. She tied the mule in front of the general store and went inside, the small bell above the door sounding tinny and false. Mr. Henderson, the store owner, was behind his counter, wiping down a jar. He stopped when he saw her. His face, usually florid and friendly, went pale and tight. "Mrs. McKee," he said, his voice a dry croak. "Mr. Henderson, I need salt, 2 pounds, and a packet of needles." He did not move. He just looked at her, his eyes full of fear. "Clara," he began. "Salt," she said, her voice like ice. "And needles? I have coin." She placed 2 bits on the counter. From the back of the store, 2 of Tucker's men emerged. They had been drinking, their faces flushed. They were not the ones who had been at her ranch. These were different, meaner, dumber. "Well, looky here," one of them said, a big, bearded man. "If it ain't the little Indian lover." Clara did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Henderson. "My salt, Mr. Henderson." "You heard him, Henderson." The other man, a reedy, weasel-faced man, chimed in. "Give the lady her supplies. Maybe she needs some beads. 2, some paint." "Get out of my way," Clara said, her hand still on the counter, inches from the coin. "Or what?" the big man said, stepping in front of her. "You gonna shoot us like you did those tin cans towns talking? Clara, say you're a regular Annie Oakley. Or maybe you're just crazy. Hold up out there with that killer buck." Clara's hand moved, not toward her pocket. She picked up the 50-pound sack of flour that was sitting on the floor by the counter and, in one fluid, desperate motion, swung it. It hit the big man square in the chest. He was not expecting it. The sack exploded in a cloud of white, choking dust. and he staggered back, gasping, his eyes wide with surprise. Clara did not wait. She ran. She left the salt, the needles, the coin. She burst out of the store, the bell jangling wildly, the shouts of traitor and whore following her. She fumbled with the mule's reins, her hands shaking with rage and fear. She heard the store door open again. "Leave her be!" a voice shouted. She looked. It was a young man, barely more than a boy. Billy? He was one of Tucker's. She'd seen him on the edge of the posse, but he was not like the others. He was standing in the doorway, his face pale. The two men, covered in flour, were trying to get past him. Tucker said to let her be. The boy lied, his voice cracking. He wants to handle it himself, at her place. The men stopped. That made sense to them, Tucker's authority. Clara used the moment. She got the mule untied, scrambled onto its back, and kicked it into a panicked trot, the shotgun bouncing on her lap. She fled the town, the white dust of the flour still settling in the street. She rode hard, not stopping until the town was a smudge behind her. She had failed. No salt, no needles. And now, they knew. They knew for sure. She stopped at the small cantina run by Rosa Gomez, a mile outside of town. Rosa was a widow, too. Her husband had been killed by a snake, and she existed, like Clara, in the margins. She was Mexican. The town tolerated her, but did not accept her. Clara slid off the mule. "Water," she gasped, her throat raw. Rosa came out, her face impassive. She was a large, calm woman. She carried a dipper of water. Clara drank it, spilling it down her chin. "They are animals," Clara choked out. "They are men," Rosa corrected, her voice soft. "Which is worse? You should not have come." Clara: "I needed salt." "You need to leave," Rosa said, her black eyes serious. "I hear the talk. I sell them the whiskey. Tucker has been boasting. He says he is going to cleanse your ranch. He says he is going to burn out the sin. He means to kill me." "He means to make an example," Rosa said, which was the same thing. "He has 20 men. He is just waiting for the right moment. Go north, Clara. Go to Colorado, tonight." "I cannot," Clara said, handing the dipper back. "Because of him, the Comanche." Rosa's eyes held no judgment, only a deep, weary sadness. Clara just looked at her. "Then you are a fool," Rosa said, but she said it gently. She went inside and came back with a small cloth bag. "Salt and some thread. It is all I have." Clara fumbled in her pocket for a coin. Rosa pushed her hand away. "Go, and God go with you. You will need him." Clara rode back, the small bag of salt a heavy weight in her pocket. The sun was low, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange. She was a fool. She was a traitor, and she was going back. She rode toward the Comanche circle. It was still there, unchanged. As she approached, the same gap opened, Maka and the other warrior moving their ponies aside. She rode through, her head held high. This time, as she passed, she looked at Maka. He was not looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the eastern horizon, the same place she had seen the dust, the same place Rosa had warned her about. He knew. She got back to the cabin, the dread a cold stone in her stomach. She put the mule away, her movements automatic. She went to the well to draw water for the night, her mind on Tucker, on the 20 men. She saw it as she reached for the bucket. On the stone lid of the well, 3 small, smooth. River stones were stacked, one on top of the other. They had not been there this morning. It was a sign, a message. Not from Tucker, from the circle. She looked at the line of warriors. None of them were watching her. They were all looking east. She understood. "We see you." But it was not just her they saw. They saw her defiance. They saw her ride to town. They saw her return. And they, too, saw the threat coming from the east. The 3 stones were not a threat. They were an acknowledgement, a shared reality. She took the water and went inside, barring the door. Night fell like a blanket being thrown over the world. She lit the lantern and went to the cellar. Koa was standing. He was leaning on the wall, his weight on his good leg, but he was standing. His face was slick with sweat, his jaw clenched with the agony of it, but he was on his feet. He had used the last 8 hours to force his body to obey him. He was no longer a victim. He was a partner. "You are back," he said. "They are coming," she said, setting the lantern down. "Tucker, tonight or tomorrow. 20 men. He is going to cleanse the ranch." Koa nodded, as if she had just confirmed the weather. He took a painful, lurching step away from the wall, his hand out to steady himself on a barrel. "Then we prepare," he said. Clara went back upstairs. She checked the bar on her door. She went to her ammunition box. She had the 2 shells in the shotgun, and 10 more. That was all. 12 shells against 20 men. She was checking the thin wire of her fence through the window, wondering if it would even slow a horse, when a shadow fell across the porch. She spun, the shotgun coming up. It was Maka. He was alone. He was standing on her porch, his hands empty, his arms folded. He had come from the circle without a sound. A ghost. She opened the door, but stood in the frame, the shotgun held across her body. "He is standing," Maka said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Tomorrow," Maka said, his voice a low rumble. "We talk." It was a formal, grave pronouncement, an end to the waiting. "Tomorrow," Clara said, her voice tight. "Tucker is coming, with 20 men." Maka's face did not change, but his eyes, black and deep, seemed to absorb the information, to weigh it. "Tucker," he said, the name a hard, ugly sound in his mouth. "He is a man who breaks the world. We know him." He looked at her, at the shotgun, at the fear and defiance in her eyes. "Tomorrow," he said again, his voice final. "We talk." He turned, and before she could even form a reply, he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. He had not walked. He had vanished. Clara closed the door, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She leaned against the wood, her mind a whirl of fear. Tucker and his 20 men, Maka and his demand, and Koa, one-legged, in her cellar. The night was utterly silent. There was no wind, no coyotes. The world was holding its breath. And then, from the east, she heard it, a low, distant rumble, not thunder. It was the sound of many horses, moving fast. A voice, thick with whiskey and hate, bellowed from the darkness, shattering the silence. "Clara McKee, you in there? You traitorous bitch! We have come to cleanse this place. We have come to burn you out." Tucker had not waited for tomorrow. He was here. The shout from the darkness was a judgment. Tucker was not coming. He was here. Clara reacted without thinking. She slammed the heavy wooden door, the sound a flat crack in the night. She dropped the thick bar into its iron brackets. It would not hold them for long, but it was all she had. "He is here," she said, her voice a dry whisper. She turned from the door, her back pressed against it, and looked at the open trapdoor. Koa was already on the ladder. He was not the broken man she had pulled from the arroyo. He was not the patient she had fed broth. He was halfway up, his face a mask of iron, his weight resting on his one good leg. He had heard, he understood. "How many?" he asked, his voice low, not a trace of fear in it. "He said 20, Clara said, the shotgun heavy in her hands. "He said he was going to burn us out." Another shout from outside, closer this time. "You hear me, McKee? Send out the buck. We know he is in there. We will give him a quick death, better than you will get." Laughter followed, a rough, drunken sound that made Clara's skin crawl. Koa reached the top of the ladder. He hauled himself onto the cabin floor, a painful, grunting motion. But he did it alone. He leaned against the wall, his breath hissing through his teeth, his hand moving to his belt. His knife was not there. He had lost it in the arroyo. His eyes, black and furious, scanned the room for a weapon. "All I have is this," Clara said, holding up the shotgun. "And 10 shells. After these 2, it is enough," he said. He pointed. "The window." Clara ran to the small window, the one that faced east, and peered out. The night was lit by a dozen torches. They had come, a mob on horseback, their faces ugly in the flickering, greasy light. They were not a posse. They were a lynch mob. They were a fire looking for something to burn. "You have 5 seconds, woman," Tucker roared. 1. "What about your people?" Clara hissed at Koa. "The circle." "They are waiting," Koa said, his gaze on the door. 2. "Waiting for what?" Before he could answer, a new sound split the night. It was not a shout, it was a cry, a high, ululating call that rose from the south, from the ridges, from the darkness behind Tucker's men. It was a sound that did not belong to the world of whiskey and torches. Clara spun to the other window, the one facing south. The circle was not waiting. The circle was in motion. Maka and his warriors were on their ponies, but they were not attacking. They were moving, a silent, fluid shadow, fanning out in a wide, perfect arc. They were not riding to save her. They were riding to surround the men who had come to burn her. The shouts from Tucker's men died, replaced by nervous, confused mutters. "What the hell is that?" one man yelled. "Tucker, look." Tucker, on his big roan, turned in his saddle. He saw the line of silent warriors, the moonlight glinting on their lances, on the long hair of their riders. They were a living, breathing trap, and he had ridden right into the middle of it. The night, which had been full of noise, was suddenly deathly quiet. A 3-way stand, Tucker's mob caught in the open, Maka's warriors, a silent crescent of death, and Clara, in her small sod house, the prize and the fuse, trapped between them both. "Maka!" Tucker bellowed, his voice losing its drunken confidence, now tight with rage and a new, cold fear. "This is not your fight, this is settler business. We are here for the killer she is hiding." From the darkness, Maka's voice rolled, deep and calm, as if he were discussing the weather. "You are on her land." That was all. Just the fact. "She is a traitor!" Tucker screamed, his authority crumbling, his voice cracking. "She is with them. She is harboring the man who murdered Johnson." This was the moment. Clara knew it. This was the pivot. "Do not," Koa said from the floor. He saw the look on her face. "You are the target." "It is my house," she said. She stepped to the door. She did not unbar it, but she put her mouth to the crack in the wood. "Tucker!" she yelled, her voice high and thin, but it carried. "You hear me?" "Speak, you bitch," he spat back. "This man was hurt," she screamed, the words tearing from her throat, all the fear and rage of the last week. "He was hurt, and I gave him water. I choose to save a man, not a side. This is my land, and you are not welcome on it. Get off it." Her declaration hung in the air. I choose to save a man, not a side. For a single, agonizing heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Tucker, trapped, Maka, waiting, Koa, at her feet, listening. Then, a shot. It was not from Maka, it was not from Tucker. It was from the mob, a nervous man, a drunk man, a man whose fear had pulled his trigger for him. The bullet did not hit the door. It hit the small porch roof above Clara's head. A chunk of old, dry wood exploded, sending splinters raining down. The string had been lit. It was not a choice. It was a reflex. The unknown shot was a signal to everyone. Maka's warriors let out their cry. the high, terrifying sound that she had heard before. Tucker's men, their discipline gone, began firing wildly, screaming. They were not shooting at the house. They were shooting at the shadows, at the warriors who were now charging. Chaos erupted. "Get down!" Clara yelled. She threw herself to the floor, away from the door. The cabin walls, made of sod and thin planks, were not built for this. Bullets tore through the wood. A sickening, heavy thump, thump, thump. A cup on her shelf exploded. The mirror, her last vanity, shattered. Clara crawled toward the broken window, her shotgun in her hand. She had 12 shells, 12 chances. "Burn it," she heard Tucker roar above the din. "Burn the damn house, smoke them out." She saw him, the reedy man from the general store, the one who had called her a whore. He was off his horse, running toward the porch. In his hand, he held a torch, one of the ones they had brought, blazing. He was going to set fire to her porch. Clara raised the shotgun. She put the barrel through the broken window. She saw the man, his face a mask of hate in the torchlight. She put her finger on the trigger. She could not do it. He was a man. He was... The front door, the one she was leaning against just moments before, burst open. It was Koa. He did not walk. He lunged. He threw himself into the doorway, standing on his one good leg, his bad one, thick with her bandages, trailing behind him. He stood, framed in the doorway, unarmed, his chest bare, his hair long and black. He stood as a target, a declaration. The effect was absolute. The reedy man with the torch froze, his arm halfway up. He stared. He had come to kill a rumor, a ghost, and here was the man, alive, defiant, and terrible. The shooting from Tucker's men faltered. They had been firing at a house. Now the house had a face. "It is him!" someone screamed. "He is alive!" Even the cries of Maka's warriors seemed to pause. A brief, shocked intake of breath. They saw their warrior, not dead, not a captive, but standing, facing the enemy. The reedy man recovered first. His face, which had been frozen in shock, twisted into a new, deeper malice. He saw Koa, wounded, unarmed, swaying. He dropped the torch. He fumbled, pulling his revolver from his belt. "Die, you red filth!" he screamed, leveling the gun at Koa's chest. Clara did not think. She did not choose. She acted. She was still on the floor, but she saw the gun. She saw Koa, defenseless. She saw the man who had called her a traitor. She raised her shotgun. She did not aim. She pointed. She was 3 feet from Koa's back. She pushed the barrel past his hip and pulled both triggers. The sound was not a shot. It was an explosion. The cabin, the porch, the entire world was consumed by the blast. The force of it threw her backward. The reedy man did not scream. He did not fall. He was just gone, blown off the porch by a solid wall of lead, his body vanishing into the darkness. Silence. A new silence, heavier, colder, and more terrible than before. The gunfire stopped. The war cry stopped. Clara pushed herself up. Her ears were ringing, the smell of sulfur and smoke filling her lungs. Koa was still standing, though he was now leaning heavily against the doorframe. He looked back at her, his face unreadable in the gloom, his eyes black pits. She was smoking. The shotgun was hot, useless in her hands. She had done it. She had killed him. She had chosen. And then, from the darkness, a high, thin scream, a man's scream. "My arm, God, my arm, I am hit!" It was Tucker. In the silence, in the second that everyone had been frozen, watching her, one of Maka's warriors had not been. A single, silent arrow had found its mark. That broke the spell. That broke the mob. "Tucker's hit!" a man yelled, his voice pure panic. "It is a trap. It is an ambush. Get him, and let's go." The mob, which had been a brave, drunken force, dissolved. They had come to lynch a half-dead man and bully a woman. They were in a war, wounded, and their leader was down. They fled. Clara heard them. A scramble of horses, men shouting, cursing, running for their lives. They fired a few last, wild shots into the night, but they were running. The sound of their retreat faded, hoofbeats disappearing into the night, swallowed by the prairie. Clara stood up. Her legs were shaking so hard she could barely stand. She walked, as if in a dream, to the open doorway. Koa was still there, but he was sliding now, his good leg giving out. He sank to the porch, his back against the wall, his head thrown back, breathing hard. She stepped out onto the porch. The torch the man had dropped was smoldering, the wood of the porch smoking. She stomped it out, her boot heel crushing the embers. The reedy man's body was a dark lump in the yard, 10 feet away. Her house was ruined. The window was gone. The door was broken. The walls were full of holes. The porch roof, where the first shot had hit, was a jagged, splintered mess. The old boundaries were gone. She looked out. The circle of warriors was still there. They were not moving. They were not celebrating. They were just watching. Maka rode his pony forward, stopping just at the edge of the light from her open door. He did not look at Koa. He did not look at the body in the yard. He looked at her. He looked at the smoking shotgun in her hand. He looked at her face, streaked with soot. Clara stared back. She had no words. There were no words for this. The air was thick with smoke, gun smoke. It hung in the night air, heavy and acrid. A gray curtain that had not yet closed. It was a new world, and she did not know the rules. Maka sat his horse, a statue of judgment in the torchlit yard. The smoke from Clara's shotgun, a gray, acrid cloud, drifted between them. He looked at the smoking weapon in her hands. He looked at the dark lump in the dirt that had, a moment before, been a man. He looked at Koa, who was slumped in the broken doorway, breathing hard, but alive. Clara stood on the porch, her entire body a single, vibrating string. The heat of the gun was fading, the cold of the night seeping in. She had killed a man. She had taken a side. She was no longer the widow in the middle. Maka did not speak. He did not need to. The conversation he had wanted to have tomorrow, they had just had it, in powder and blood. He had seen the white men come to burn. He had seen Koa stand to defend the house, and he had seen Clara defend Koa, with a finality that left no room for questions. He raised his hand, not in peace, but in acknowledgement. He looked at Koa, and his gaze was hard, but the contempt was gone. He gave a single, sharp nod. "You are alive." Then he turned that gaze on Clara. "You are a fighter." He said nothing. He simply turned his horse, a movement of profound, quiet dignity, and gave a silent signal to his warriors. The circle, which had been a ring of imminent violence, dissolved, like smoke themselves. The riders turned their ponies. They did not cheer. They did not jeer. They simply vanished back into the night, one by one, until the only sound was the fading, soft thunder of unshod hooves. They were not leaving. Clara knew that. They were merely pulling back, to wait, to see what the next day's sun would bring. The last horse faded into the darkness. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the wind whistling through the new, round holes in her cabin walls. Clara and Koa were alone, with the dead. The shotgun, suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds, slipped from her nerveless fingers. It hit the porch with a clatter that sounded as loud as the blast had been. The door. Koa gasped from the floor. He was trying to push himself up, to get out of the open. Vulnerable space. The adrenaline fled Clara's body, leaving a cold, sick, shaking emptiness. She went to him. She did not think. She just moved. She put her hands under his arms. "On 3, she whispered. He was a dead weight. But she pulled, her own muscles screaming. He roared, a low, pained sound as his wounded leg took weight. But he used it, pushing with his good leg. They staggered, half falling, back into the cabin's darkness. The room was a wreck. Her world, her small, neat, orderly world, was shattered. Bullet holes stitched the walls. Her mirror was a spider web of broken glass. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and something else, the coppery scent of death from the yard. Clara let Koa slide to the floor, his back against the wall, and she fell against the door frame, her own legs giving out. She pushed the door. It was broken. The wood splintered where the bar should have been, but it scraped shut, covering the opening. They sat in the dark. The only light was the faint, red glow from the cracks in the cast-iron stove. The only sound was their breathing. 2 sets of lungs, dragging in the smoky air, a ragged chorus of survival. Clara began to shake. It was not a shiver. It was a deep, uncontrollable convulsion. A storm that started in her belly and shook her to her teeth. She had killed a man. She had seen him, his face ugly with hate, and she had erased him. "It is over," Koa said from the darkness. His voice was a low rasp. He was... She could not form the words. She wrapped her arms around herself, but the shaking would not stop. "He came to burn you," Koa said, his voice flat. They all did. She looked down at her hands, but she could not see them. "I am cold. The fire is still in the stove," he said. She did not move. She felt strange, a sharp, stinging pain in her side. It was not the cold, it was something new. She had been so focused on the gun, on the door, she had not felt it. She touched her ribs. Her hand came away wet. She said. It was a small, surprised sound. Koa heard the change in her breathing. "What is it?" "The porch roof," she whispered. "When the first shot, the wood." She stood, her legs trembling, and stumbled to the stove. She fumbled for a match, her fingers clumsy. She struck it, the sulfur flaring, and lit the lantern. The yellow light filled the ruined room, illuminating the cost of their survival. Koa looked at her. Her face was pale, streaked with soot, and her dress, her simple calico dress, was torn at the side, just below her arm, and the fabric was dark, glistening in the lamplight. "You are hit," he said. It was the same flat statement he had used when he saw the dust on the horizon. A fact. "A splinter," she said, her voice shaking. "A piece of wood. It is in there." She could feel it now, a long, sharp, burning line. She tried to reach for it, to see, but the angle was wrong. She gasped as her fingers brushed the raw, open flesh. I cannot reach it." She was standing by the cot, the one he had been on, her body rigid with a new, fresh pain. The shaking was worse. She was not just cold, she was in shock. "Let me see," Koa said. He did not move from the floor, but he pushed himself up, his back against the wall. Clara looked at him, the wounded warrior, her patient, now assessing her. It was a strange, terrifying reversal. She moved to him, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, a combination of pain and the sudden, delayed terror of the fight. She stood over him. He looked up at her, his face shadowed, the firelight from the stove catching the sharp planes of his cheeks. "The dress," he said. "It is in the way." She fumbled at her side, trying to pull the torn fabric away to see the wound, but her hands were clumsy, shaking so violently she could not grip the cloth. She was crying now, she realized. Not sobbing, just hot, silent tears of shock and pain, cutting clean tracks in the soot on her face. "I cannot. It is stuck." She was breaking. The strength that had held the shotgun, that had faced Maka, that had killed a man, was gone. "Tear my dress," she gasped, the words a desperate, broken plea. It was not a request. It was the sound of her surrender to the pain, to the moment. Koa looked at her, at this woman who had stood against his people, against her own people, who had just shot a man from her doorway. He looked at her trembling hands, at the tears, at the torn fabric over her new wound. A low sound rumbled in his chest. It was so unexpected. She thought she had imagined it. It was a laugh, soft, deep, and impossibly gentle. It was the laugh of a man who had seen the absolute worst of the world and had just found something true in the middle of it. His hand, the one that had been braced on the floor, rose. His fingers, burning hot with his own fever, brushed her side, finding the edge of the rip. "I'll leave you no fabric," he said, his voice a warm, low murmur, a joke so dark it was almost sacred. "Only fire." His fingers found purchase, and he pulled. The sound of the cotton tearing was loud, like a sheet ripping in the wind, a final, definitive severing. It was a release. Clara gasped as the cool air hit the wound. It was exposed now, a long, ugly gash, dark blood welling from it, a jagged spike of pine, as long as her finger, buried deep in the flesh. Koa's laugh was gone. His face was stone. "Hold!" he commanded, his voice all warrior now. He did not wait. His fingers, no longer gentle, clamped down on the end of the wood. Clara hissed, her hands flying to his shoulders to push him away. But she was too late. "Breathe," he ordered, and he pulled. It was not a scream. It was a sharp, punched-out gasp, a sound of pure, clean agony. She sagged, her knees buckling, all the air and strength leaving her body. She fell forward, onto him, her head colliding with his shoulder, her hands gripping his shirt. He did not recoil. His arm, the one that was not slick with her blood, came up, wrapping around her waist, holding her, steadying her. He held her as she shuddered, her body pressed against his, her breath hot on his neck. "It is done," he whispered, his own voice tight with the pain of the movement. She did not pull away. She could not. She leaned on him, all her weight, her face buried in his shoulder. She was crying, the shaking, the fear, the guilt. It all poured out of her, not in loud sobs, but in a deep, silent, physical quake. "I killed him," she whispered, the words muffled. "Koa, I killed him." "He came to burn you," Koa said, his voice a hard rumble against her ear. "He came to kill us. You chose life, our life. It was war," he finished. "And you fought." His arm tightened around her, a gesture of pure, primal comfort. It was not the touch of a man to a woman. It was the touch of a survivor to a survivor. The living, holding on to the living. She felt him grunt, a sharp intake of breath. She pulled back instantly, the nurse, the caretaker, taking over. "Your leg," she said, her voice a wet, broken thing. "I hurt you. You stood on it." He was pale, his eyes closed for a second. "It is." "Do not say it is nothing," she said, her voice fierce. She scrambled away from him, wiping her tears on her filthy sleeve. "We are a pair," she whispered, a sound that was half a sob, half a laugh. "Bleeding all over my floor." She went for the whiskey, the last of it, and the bandages. She came back and knelt on the floor beside him. The stove light cast a warm, red glow over them. She took a rag, poured a little of the precious whiskey on it, and pressed it to her own side. She hissed, her teeth gritting, but she did not cry out. She cleaned the wound, her hand steady now. Then she looked at his leg. The bandage she had tied so carefully was gone, ripped off in the fight or in his lunge. The wound, the one she had pushed the arrow through, was open, dark, and bleeding. He had torn it wide. "You fool," she whispered, the words so tender they hurt. "You brave, brave fool." "You were in trouble," he said, his voice tight. "So were you." She began to clean his wound. He did not move. He watched her. His eyes, in the firelight, were not just black. They were full of the fire he had spoken of. He watched her hands, her face, her torn dress. He was seeing her, the woman, not the jailer, not the nurse, but the person. She finished, her hands stained with both their blood. She tied the last bandage. They were quiet. The cabin was a fortress, breached and broken, but still standing. Outside, the body in the yard was a testament to the choice she had made. Tomorrow, Tucker would be back, or the sheriff, or the whole world, but not tonight. She got to her feet, her body a symphony of new aches. She found a blanket, one without a bullet hole, and brought it to him. He was still against the wall. She draped it over his shoulders. "You need to be on the cot," she said. He shook his head. "The floor is good." She was too tired to argue. She sat in her one good chair, the old wooden rocker, and looked at the stove, at the red, glowing cracks. The fire inside was the only thing in the world that felt warm and real. "You gave me water," he said, his voice soft in the quiet room. "You gave me breath." She turned her head. He was watching her, his gaze intense. "You saved my life tonight," she said. "When you stood, you gave them a target. You were—" "I was a fool," he said, echoing her words. He reached up, his hand going to his neck. He pulled a thin, rawhide cord from under his torn buckskin shirt. She had never seen it before. He pulled it, with some effort, over his head. He held it out. On the cord was a single smooth piece of polished bone, the size of her thumb, and a chip of dark, red stone, like a hardened drop of blood. "I cannot take that," she said, her voice hoarse. "It was my brother's," he said, as if that explained it. "He said it was the color of a strong heart. He gave it to me when the sickness took him. He said it would keep me safe." "Then you must keep it," she whispered. "It did not keep him safe," Koa said, his voice flat, devoid of self-pity. "And it did not keep me safe. You did." He held it out, the cord dangling. "I owe you breath. This holds my breath, my brother's, mine. Now it is yours. It is not a gift. It is a trade." She stared at the offering. His logic was strange, twisted, but it made a terrible, perfect sense in this ruined room, in this new world. She was too tired to move, too tired to argue. He saw her hesitation. He leaned forward, a movement that must have cost him dearly. He grunted with the pain, but he came closer, invading her space. She did not flinch. She could feel the heat of his fever, smell the salt and sweat and blood on him. He was close enough that she could see the firelight reflected in his dark eyes. He lifted the cord. "Turn," he whispered. Her heart, which had been pounding with fear, now began a new, slow, heavy beat. She turned her head, offering him the back of her neck. His fingers, rough, calloused, and burning hot, brushed her cold skin as he passed the cord around her neck. She shivered, but not from the cold. He fumbled with the knot, his movements clumsy. Then it was done. The necklace fell, the bone and the red stone landing on her collarbone, just below the hollow of her throat. It was warm, impossibly warm, as if it held his fever, his fire. He did not pull away. His hands rested for a second on her shoulders. He leaned his forehead against her hair. Just for a moment, she could feel him breathing, a long, slow sigh of pain and exhaustion and release. It was not a kiss. It was a prayer, a grounding. Then he pulled back. "Now," he whispered, his voice rough. "We are bound, now. We survive tomorrow." Clara's hand, the one that was not shaking, rose and her fingers closed over the warm stone. It was a promise, an anchor, a weight. She looked at him, and for the first time, she truly saw him. Not the enemy, not the patient, Koa. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Outside, the wind rose, a high, lonely sound, whistling through the bullet holes in her walls, singing the song of their new, shared, and terrible life. The first light of dawn was a cruel, gray accusation. It crept into the cabin, not through the windows, but through the bullet holes, painting the floor in small, round patches of light. Clara had not slept. She was sitting in the rocker, the cold, heavy stone of Koa's necklace against her skin. Her side was a dull, throbbing fire. Koa was on the floor, his back against the wall, his head bowed, asleep or in a state of exhaustion so deep it looked like death. The shotgun, reloaded with 2 of her precious 10 shells, was across her lap. The cabin was a tomb, silent and cold. The only sound was the wind, which had risen in the pre-dawn hours, whistling its high, lonely song through the splintered wood. And then another sound. Horses. Clara was on her feet in an instant, the rocker scraping, the shotgun at her shoulder. She moved to the broken doorway, her heart a cold stone. It was not Tucker, it was Maka. He was there just as the sun broke the horizon, painting the sky a violent, bloody red. He was not alone this time. He had 20 warriors with him, and they were not a silent circle. They were a war party, their faces painted, their lances ready. They looked at the dark shape in her yard, the dead man, and their faces were hard. Maka rode to her porch, the same as he had the night before, but this was not a parley. This was an ultimatum. "The sun has risen," he said. He looked past her, into the cabin, his gaze finding Koa, who was now awake, struggling to sit upright. "He is alive." "We are alive," Clara said, her voice a dry rasp. Maka nodded, his eyes taking in the bullet holes, the broken door, the dried blood on her torn dress. He looked at the necklace she wore, the red stone and the bone, stark against her pale skin. His face did not change, but his eyes softened, just for a fraction of a second. "Tucker is wounded," he said. "The arrow was a clean shot, through the flesh of his arm. He will not die. He will only hate more." "He will be back," Clara said. "He is back," Maka said. "He is in redemption, and the word is like a fire. They say you have a dozen warriors in your house. They say you are a witch, that you have turned against your people. They say you are the Comanche's whore." Clara flinched, the words a physical blow, but her grip on the shotgun did not loosen. "You have done what he could not," Maka said, a strange, grim respect in his voice. "You have united the White Town. They are all with him now, not just his men, the blacksmith, the storekeeper, the sheriff. They are coming, and they are coming to kill you." "Then we will fight," Clara said, her voice dull. "You will die," Maka said, his voice flat. "There are 2 of you. One is wounded. One is a woman." He said it without malice, a simple statement of fact. "And your house is made of paper. They will burn it and shoot you when you run." He held out his hand. "Come, now. We will take you. We will take Koa. We will ride to the high valleys. You will be safe." The offer hung in the air, a lifeline she had never expected. To go, to leave the dust, the hate, the fear, to go with them, to the place of stone and water he had spoken of. She looked at Koa. He was watching her, his face grim. He was a warrior, but he knew they could not win this. He is right," Koa said, his voice rough. "We must go. Clara, there is no choice here, only death." Clara looked at the ruined cabin, her home. She looked at the dead man in the yard, his body already gathering flies in the morning sun. She looked at Maka, his face stern, his hand still outstretched. "No," she said. The word was small, but it was absolute. Maka's hand fell. "You are a fool. They will kill you." "Maybe," Clara said. She took a breath, the cold air burning her lungs. But if I run now, he wins. He wins. He will tell the story that I was a traitor, that I was a coward. He will use this death, to fuel his hate for the next 20 years. He will burn another ranch, and another, and he will say, "Remember Clara McKee." She shook her head, the necklace heavy on her chest. I will not be his excuse. I will not run. I will close the exit. I will stand here. I will face them, and I will tell them the truth, that I saved a man, not a side. The truth is a bullet in this land, Mecca said, his voice cold, and it is coming for you. Then I will face that, too, she said, but not in here, not in a trap. She looked at her well, the center of her small world, the place she had drawn the water that had started all this. Out there, she said, pointing, at the well, in the open, where they can all see. Maka stared at her as if she were insane, and perhaps she was. You are not fighting a war, Koa said, his voice harsh as he pulled himself up the wall, his face white with pain. You are building your own gallows. It is my land, she said, her voice shaking but hard. I will not let them burn it. I will give it to them, but they will not take it. They will not take us. She turned to Mecca. Will you stay, not to fight, not for me, but for him? She pointed to Koa. Will you be a witness? Will you let them see that you are not a mob, that you are a people, that you are here, watching? Mecca's face was a stone. He was weighing her strange, suicidal plan. He was weighing the honor of his warrior against the foolishness of this white woman. We will watch, he said finally. We will not fight. We will watch them kill you, and then we will have our own talk with Mr. Tucker. It was all she had. The sun was high when they came. Noon, the worst, hottest, most judgmental time of day. Clara had done what she could. She had dragged the dead man from her yard, a terrible, heavy task that left her vomiting in the bushes. She had covered him with rocks, a poor, shallow grave. She had pulled her one good chair, the rocker, onto the porch. And then she had waited. Koa was not in the cellar. He was not in the house. He was in the broken doorway, his father's old rifle in his hands. It was Jed's, a Henry. It was not loaded. She had no ammunition for it, but he held it, a symbol. He was not a patient. He was a guard. Clara was at the well. She was sitting on the stone lip, the place where the Comanche had left their 3 small stones of acknowledgement. Her shotgun was on the ground, 10 feet away, useless. She had made her choice. She would meet them with empty hands. The sound of them was a low, angry rumble, like the thunder of a dry storm. And then they were there, cresting the ridge. It was not a mob. It was an army. It was Tucker, his arm in a crude, bloody sling, his face a mask of black, venomous hate. He was on his roan. Beside him, riding a nervous-looking mare, was Sheriff Fates, his thin badge winking in the sun, his face pale and sweating. And behind them, all of them, Mr. Henderson, the storekeeper, the blacksmith, the men from the saloon, and the boy, Billy, his face a white, terrified blur in the crowd. There were 30 of them, maybe more, the whole town. They stopped, fanning out in a wide arc, their horses and wagons kicking up a cloud of white dust. They were a wall of condemnation. And on the southern ridge, a second wall, Maka and his 20 warriors, sitting on their ponies, their lances stark against the blue sky, silent, watching. The 3 laws, all present. Tucker, the law of the mob. Fates, the thin, useless law of the badge. And Mecca, the ancient, patient law of the land itself. Clara McKee, Sheriff Fates called, his voice a reedy squeak. He was reading from a piece of paper. By the authority of the territory of New Mexico, you are under arrest for treason, for harboring a murderer, and for the murder of one Hiram. His name was Ira. The weasel-faced man from the saloon shouted. Hiram was his brother. She killed Ira. You see, woman! Tucker roared, his voice thick with triumph. The law is here, not your law, the real law. It is over. I am not resisting, Clara said, her voice small in the vast, hot silence. But it carried. I am here, but I will not go with you. You will hang, a woman screamed from the back, from a wagon. Hang the whore! The crowd surged, a low, ugly sound growing in their throats. Hang her! Burn them? Tucker smiled. He had them. He turned to Fates. Sheriff, do your duty. Arrest the woman. And the buck in the door. Sheriff Fates, his face slick with sweat, dismounted. He unhooked his revolver from his belt. He was shaking. He looked at Clara. He looked at Koa, who was a statue of dark, silent defiance in the doorway. And he looked at Maka on the ridge. Clara, ma'am, he stammered. Please, do not make this hard. I saved his life. Sheriff, Clara said, her voice clear. He was dying. I gave him water. And when that man came to burn my house, with me in it, I shot him. I defended my home. I defended my life. What law is that treason? She is a liar, Tucker screamed, his voice cracking. He was losing control. This was not the quick, clean trial he wanted. He pointed, his one good arm jabbing at the crowd, at the young boy. Billy, you boy, you were there. You saw it. Tell them how she shot him in cold blood. Billy, who was holding an old rifle, looked at Tucker. He looked at Clara, at her pale, set face. He looked at Koa, and at the 20 silent warriors on the hill. He stammered. Tell them, Tucker roared, riding his horse toward the boy, his face inches from his, or you will hang with her. You were at the store. You warned her. Prove your loyalty. Boy, prove you are one of us. Shoot the buck. Shoot the killer. Shoot him. Now. He was screaming, his face purple, spittle flying. He had lost his mind, his plan. He was just rage. He pointed at Koa, who stood, unmoving, in the doorway. Shoot him! Billy in order! Shoot him! Billy's face was a mask of pure terror. He was shaking. The crowd was silent, all eyes on him. This was the moment, the blood sacrifice. Billy raised his rifle. His hands were trembling so hard, the barrel waved. He aimed it, his eyes squeezed shut. He was crying. He aimed it at Koa. Do it! Tucker screamed, his voice a raw wound. Billy pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening. But Koa did not fall. The bullet, fired from a boy's shaking hands, did not go into the doorway. It hit the dirt. It hit the dust. Not 3 feet from Tucker's own horse, a small, insignificant puff. The spell was broken. The crowd, which had been a single, hateful mind, held its breath. Tucker stared at the puff of dust. He turned his head, his face a slow, terrible mask of fury, toward the boy. He raised his good hand to backhand him, to kill him. Stop. It was Clara. She was on her feet. Her voice was not a scream. It was a command. This is what you want, she cried, her arms out, pointing at Tucker, at the boy, at the sheriff. This a scared boy shooting a wounded man, a mob killing a woman. This is your town. This is your law. The crowd, the men, the blacksmith, Mr. Henderson. They looked away. They looked at their feet. They looked at the ground. She is right, Tucker, Henderson mumbled, his voice low. This ain't right. What? Tucker spun on him. You, too, Henderson. You a traitor, too. It ain't worth a war, the blacksmith called out, his voice a low rumble. He was not looking at Tucker. He was looking at the 20 warriors on the hill, who were now as one, fitting arrows to their bows. not aiming, just readying. The crowd saw it. The fantasy of a righteous, easy hanging evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard reality of a war they could not win. They had come to kill a woman. They had not come to die. "Let her go, Tucker," someone else called. "It ain't worth it." "She killed Ira," he screamed, but his voice was weak. His power was gone. It had been built on their fear, and now their fear had a new target. "I will leave," Clara said, her voice clear in the new, broken silence. "He is right. I will go. I will leave this ranch. Today. You can have it. You can have the land. You can have the house. It is poisoned. Anyway." She looked at Tucker. "I will leave, and Koa will leave, and the Comanche, they will not raid. Will you?" she called. "Up to the hill." Maka heard. He raised his hand, palm out, the sign of peace. The deal was struck. "That is the bargain." Clara said, "We go, and this ends. No more blood, no more death, or you can have your hanging, and you can have your war, and you can all be dead by sundown." She stood there, a lone, small woman in a torn dress, a necklace of bone and stone at her throat, dictating terms to two armies. The crowd was gone. It was just a collection of tired, scared, ashamed men. They began to turn their wagons. They began to back their horses away. Let's go home, Sheriff," the blacksmith said, his voice full of gravel. "There's nothing for us here." Sheriff Fates, who looked as if he was about to collapse, nodded, fumbling with his gun, trying to reholster it. He climbed on his horse, his face ashen. They left, one by one. They drifted away, not as a group, but as individuals, avoiding eye contact. They left her there, in the yard, until it was just Tucker. His posse, his true believers, were still there. Maybe 4 or 5 of them, but they looked nervous, their eyes on Maka. Tucker stared at Clara. His face was not human. It was a mask of pure, undiluted hate, a promise of a future reckoning. "This is not over," he whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. "You have no home. You have no people. You are nothing, a ghost. I will find you. Wherever you go, I will find you, and I will finish this." He spat on the ground, on her land. Then he turned his horse, his back straight, his arm in its bloody sling, and he and his last few men rode away, not in a run, but in a slow, defeated, angry retreat. The dust of their leaving hung in the air, mixing with the smoke of the night before. Clara stood, her legs shaking, until they were gone. Then she looked at Koa, who was still in the doorway, the useless rifle at his side. He was watching her, his face unreadable. She looked at Maka. "On the hill," he raised his hand. One last time, a sign. Then he and his warriors, their job as witnesses complete, turned their ponies and vanished over the ridge. As silent as they had come. She was alone, with him. She sat down, hard, on the lip of the well. The silence that fell was the loudest sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of the end of her world, and, just maybe, the beginning of a new one. The dust of their retreat was a low, brown cloud on the eastern horizon. The sound of their wagons, their angry, ashamed voices was gone, swallowed by the prairie. Clara sat on the lip of the well, her hands limp in her lap. The sun was hot on her head, but she felt cold, hollowed out. The world she had known, the small, hard, stubborn life she had built, was gone. It had been dismantled in a single morning, by a single choice that had begun with a dipper of water. From the doorway, she heard a sound, a painful scrape of wood on wood. Koa. He was pushing himself out onto the porch, the useless Henry rifle still in his grip. He sat, his back against the bullet-scarred wall, his bad leg stretched out, the other bent. He, too, was watching the dust. He looked at her. She looked at him. There were no words. What was there to say they had won? And they had lost everything. A new sound. Not retreat. Return. Clara's hand flew to the shotgun on the ground, but she stopped. She knew the sound of those ponies now. Maka appeared, cresting the southern ridge. He was not alone. 2 of his warriors were with him. Young, hard-faced men. The rest of his war party was gone. He rode, not with the speed of war, but with the slow, deliberate pace of a man closing an account. He stopped his pony, not at her porch, but in the center of the yard, where the 3 laws had converged. He was the only one left. He looked at the grave she had made, the simple pile of rocks. He looked at the broken house. He looked at Koa, his warrior, sitting in the ruins. And then he looked at Clara. "You have your land," he said, his voice flat. "It is quiet." Clara stood up from the well, her body a single, unified ache. Her side was a hot line of pain. "It is not my land," she said, her voice clear. "Not anymore." "No," Maka agreed. He nodded toward the east. "They will not let you keep it, and you cannot stay." He rode his pony closer, until he was looking down at her. "You have a new name now. In the White Town, it is traitor. It is betrayer. They will write you into their songs. The woman who turned." Clara felt the necklace at her throat, the warm, smooth bone. She thought of Tucker's face, a mask of hate. She thought of the women in the wagon, screaming for her to hang. "I chose the living," Clara said, her voice low, the words for herself, not for him. "I did not choose a name." Maka held her gaze for a long moment. He had seen her shoot. He had seen her stand. He had seen her refuse to run. His face, which she had only ever seen as hard granite, softened, just for a moment. He had come to judge, and he had seen something he did not expect. "A name is a heavy thing to carry," he said. He turned his gaze to Koa. "And you have a new name too, Ghost. You are dead to them, and you are dead to us. You do not belong to the people. You do not belong to the white world. You belong to her." It was a statement, a release, and a burden, all in one. Koa said nothing. He simply pushed himself up, using the rifle as a crutch, and gave a single, sharp nod of his head. He accepted the judgment. "You must ride," Maka said. "Not east, not south, north, into the high canyons. There is water there. There is less memory. We will not follow you. They," he nodded east, "cannot." He gave a sharp command in his own language. One of the young warriors dismounted. He was leading a second horse, a strong bay gelding with a mean eye and a deep chest. It was Koa's horse. They had found it, or, more likely, they had held it all along. The warrior led the horse to the porch and tied the reins to the post. He also left a small, rawhide bag. Then he remounted. "Koa," Maka said, "your breath is your own. The debt is paid. What you do now, you do for your own reasons." He gathered his reins. He had done what he came to do. He had closed the circle. "Wait," Clara said. He stopped. "The boy, Billy, the one who missed." Maka's eyes were cold. "He is weak. He will not survive." "He was brave," Clara said. "He chose, too." Maka considered this. Bravery is for those who live. He said, "Go now, before the sun is at its highest." He turned his pony, and this time, he did not look back. He and his 2 warriors rode south, disappearing over the ridge, leaving nothing behind but silence. "We must go," Koa said from the porch. The work was slow and painful. Clara went into the ruined cabin. It was a graveyard of her old life. The floor was covered in glass, in plaster, in spent shells. She went to the cellar, her legs heavy. She did not take the food. She had given the land. She would leave the stores for whoever came next. She took only one thing, the small, metal tin type of her family, from the box, and Jed's old coat, a heavy wool. Even though the day was hot, the nights, where they were going, would be cold. Koa was outside. He had opened the rawhide bag Mecca's man had left. It was food, dried meat, hard biscuits, a small skin of water, a parting gift. He was checking the mule, his movements slow, his face tight with the pain of his leg. But his hands were sure. He checked the cinches. He checked the mule's shoes. He worked. He moved to the bay horse, his horse, the animal, which had been nervous, calmed at his touch, as if it recognized his hand. He was a warrior, and this was his mount. He was no longer a patient. They were packing the last of the water skin when they heard it. A single rider, coming fast, from the east, from town. Clara's hand went for the shotgun, but Koa put his hand on her arm. "Wait!" It was the boy, Billy. He was on a winded pony, his face a mess of dirt and tears and sweat. He did not come into the yard. He stopped 20 yards away, as if there were a line of fire he could not cross. I, he stammered. He looked at Clara, at her torn, bloody dress. He looked at Koa, at the horse, at the rifle in his hand. He looked like he was going to be sick. "I'm sorry, Mrs. McKee," he choked out. I didn't mean—" "You were brave, Billy," Clara said, her voice soft. The boy shook his head, his face crumpling. Tucker, he's gone mad. He's saying he'll hunt you. He's saying he'll pay a bounty." "We know," Clara said. The boy fumbled with his saddlebag. He pulled out a heavy cloth sack. "This," he said. He rode his pony a few feet closer and threw it. It landed in the dust at Clara's feet. It's for the rifle. The Henry, my PA. He had one. It's all of it." It was a full bag of ammunition. He pulled out one more thing, a small, lumpy parcel, wrapped in cloth. "And this, Rosa, Mrs. Gomez, she told me to give it to you. She said, for the journey." He did not wait for thanks. He pulled his pony's head around, his face a mask of shame and fear, and he kicked the horse, fleeing back toward town, back toward the world he was trapped in. He had paid his debt. Clara knelt, her hands shaking, opened the heavy sack. Bullets, dozens of them. Enough for a war, enough for a life. She picked up the other parcel. She unwrapped it. It was Rosa's gift, a bag of salt, a spool of thick, black thread, and a block of dried sweet fruit. Koa came to her side. He looked at the bullets. He looked at the salt. He put his hand on her shoulder. "It is time," he said. They packed the gifts. Koa, with a sharp intake of breath, mounted his bay horse. He sat tall, a warrior again. He had the Henry rifle, now in a scabbard, and it was not useless. Clara loaded her mule. She looked at the cabin one last time. She walked to the porch. The door, her broken, splintered door, was open, like a mouth. She put her hand on the wood. This house, this land, it had not been a home, it had been a cage, and now it was a memory. She pushed the door. It scraped, and it closed. The sound soft, final. She did not bar it. She did not lock it. She just left it. She mounted her mule, her shotgun across her lap. She did not look back. Koa was waiting. He looked at her, at the stone at her neck. He nodded once. He led the way. She followed. They rode north, away from the town, away from the ranch, away from the grave and the blood. They rode toward the high, cool canyons, toward the place of no memory. They entered a narrow arroyo, the one that led to the high passes. The walls rose up around them, red stone and shadow, and the wind began to blow. It came from the south, a hard, steady wind, picking up the white, dry dust of the prairie, the dust of her old life. It blew over their tracks, covering them. It blew over the ranch, over the grave, over the broken porch. A fine, white sheet, burying the past, burying the hate. Clara pulled her scarf up, her eyes on the back of the man in front of her. The wind howled, a long, lonely, and cleansing sound, and they rode on. They rode for 2 days. They rode north, and they rode hard, putting as much land as they could between themselves and the world of dust and hate. They did not speak. There was nothing to say that the land was not already saying for them. The world changed. The flat, white prairie, a land of harsh horizontal accusations, fell away. They climbed. The air grew thinner, cooler, and the scent of dust was replaced by the sharp, clean smell of rock and high, lonely places. The world turned from white and gray to a deep, profound red. They moved through canyons so narrow they had to ride single file, the walls of stone rising on either side, a fortress against the past. Clara's side was a constant, dull fire, but she had cleaned it, and Rosa's thread had stitched it closed. It was a clumsy, ugly seam, but it was hers. Koa rode in silence, his own leg a source of visible, agonizing pain. But he never slowed. He was leading them, with a deep, instinctive knowledge, toward the high places Maka had spoken of. On the third morning, Koa stopped his horse. They were at a sheer wall of red rock, a place that looked like the end of the world. Clara looked, but saw no path. Koa dismounted, his body stiff. He walked to a thicket of scrub and juniper and pushed it aside. There was a split in the rock, a path so narrow it looked like a scar, leading up. "It will be hard for the mule," he said, his first words in a day. "She will follow me," Clara said. They climbed. For an hour, the animals strained, their hooves slipping on the loose rock, the air growing colder. Clara's lungs burned. Koa, pulling his own horse, was breathing hard, his face pale, but he did not stop. And then they were through. Clara stepped out of the narrow passage, and her breath stopped. The world of white, accusing sun was gone. Below them, cupped in a high granite bowl, was a valley. It was not a desert. It was a forest. Tall pines, a deep, living green, climbed the slopes. And in the center, a sound she had only dreamed of, a sound like a promise. Water. A stream, fast and clear, cut through the center of the valley floor, shining in the high, clear sun. They had left the judgment behind. They had entered the sanctuary. They made their way down the slope, the soft carpet of pine needles silencing their steps. They stopped by the stream. Koa slid from his horse, not like a warrior, but like a man at the end of all his strength. He went to the water's edge, knelt, and put his hands in the current. He did not drink. He just let the cold, clean water run over his fingers, as if washing something off. Clara dismounted, her own legs shaking. She went to the stream, and she drank. The water was so cold it hurt her teeth. It was not the gritty, earned water of her well. It was not the hoarded, precious water of her cellar. It was just water, a gift, freely given. They made camp. It was a simple, quiet thing. Koa, his face a mask of exhaustion, gathered firewood. Clara, using the last of Rosa's salt, prepared the last of the food Billy had given them. They sat by a small, contained fire as the sun began to dip behind the high, granite peaks. They ate in silence. It was not the suspicious, tense silence of the cellar. It was not the terrified, waiting silence of the siege. It was peace. It was the sound of the wind in the high pines, and the sound of the stream splashing against the rocks. It was the sound of a world that was not holding its breath, a world that was not waiting for the next gunshot. Koa looked at the fire, the flames reflected in his dark, quiet eyes. His face, no longer tight with pain or rage, was just the face of a man, tired but alive. He looked at Clara. She was sitting on a log. Jed's old coat pulled around her shoulders, the red stone and the white bone of his necklace stark against her skin. "My people have laws," he said, his voice low, the words mixing with the sound of the stream. "Your people have laws. I have lived by my laws. I have seen yours. They are rules for hating, rules for who to kill and when to be angry, and how to prove you are strong by what you destroy." Clara looked at her own hands, calloused from the shotgun, stitched from the splinter. She thought of the woman in the wagon, her face twisted, screaming for a hanging. She thought of Tucker, his entire life built on finding the next person to name as an enemy. She said nothing. "I do not want those laws anymore," he said. He looked around the valley, at the deep, dark green of the pines, at the stars that were beginning to appear, cold and bright as chips of ice. He looked back at her, his gaze steady. "I will go with you," he said. It was not a question. It was a promise, one he was making to himself as much as to her. "To a place where this is not the only way. To a place where no one forces us to hate just to live." It was not a declaration of love. It was a declaration of intent. It was a statement of freedom, spoken in a place that had never heard the crack of a settler's rifle or the cry of a lynch mob. Clara's hand, as it had done so many times, rose to the necklace at her throat. She felt the smooth, warm bone. She had learned something. In that bloody, ruined yard, she had learned that peace was not a gift. It was not a place. It was not the absence of war. Peace was a choice. It was a thing you had to build every single day, with your own two hands. It was a thing you had to guard, not with a shotgun, but with a new set of rules. She looked at Koa, her enemy, her patient, her ally, her family. She thought of Tucker, his face a mask of hate. "He is still alive?" she said, the words a cold fact in the peaceful night. "He said he would find me." "He will look," Koa said. "He will look in the flat places. He will look in the dust. He will not look here. This land is not for him. His hate has no power here." They sat, and for the first time, Clara felt the exhaustion of the last week, of the last 2 years, settle on her. She was safe. She lay down, not far from the fire, pulling the coat tight. Koa did not sleep. He sat with his back against a wide pine, the Henry rifle, loaded with Billy's bullets, across his lap. He was watching, not the darkness. He was watching her, and the fire, and the stream. He was guarding their new, fragile, chosen life. Clara slept. It was not the thin, listening sleep of the ranch. It was a deep, dark, healing oblivion. She woke to the sound of the stream. Dawn was a soft, gray light filtering through the pines, a gentle thing, not an accusation. Koa was not by the fire. He was standing at the stream's edge, his weight on his good leg. He was looking at the water, at the way the new, golden light was striking the granite stones. Clara went to stand beside him. They did not speak. They watched the sun climb, watched the light fill the valley. They had a long way to go. North, to the high country, to a place with no name, to a life they would have to build from stone and water and silence. They were two people, a man and a woman, with no tribe, no town, and no home. They had nothing, and, for the first time, they were free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are all listening from. Please, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. And let's build a community. Do not forget to subscribe to Wild West Tales. Like this video. And if you enjoyed the story, please hit that hype button. It helps get these stories out to more folks.